Okay, so I'm gonna kind of proceed with the story, but I kind of want to just elaborate a little bit more on kind of what my grandpa taught and what I thought when I was a leftist communist. So, like, I'll just give one more example with one thing my grandpa told me was I asked my grandpa, "What do you think of the Franz Kafka book, Metamorphosis?" And in the book, there's this kid, and he becomes an insect and he stops working, and his family kind of throws him to the side and they treat him bad, and then they throw an apple on him, and then the apple grows into like it rots and it kills the boy, and then the family, once the boy's dead, the whole family's happy. And I always thought of it as like, they probably treated the boy bad, he became depressed, they blamed him, he became the scapegoat, and it was a critique of capitalist society where they treat people poorly, and your own family will discard you. And that's the way I felt what happened with my family. And but my grandpa, he had the complete opposite way of looking at it, right? And like, I thought it was an anti-capitalist critique, and I was a communist, and I was for race mixing, and I was anti-white. But my grandpa made it the complete opposite. My grandpa's like, well, the guy, instead of becoming an insect and giving up and stuff, he should have just gone all out and just worked hard. And he had like the capitalist view, or the pro-white, like, just work hard and just go all out and don't make excuses. And maybe he was a burden on his family, so it's like my grandpa's view was like the right wing view, and I had the left wing view. So that's kind of like the dichotomy that occurred. And so, but I'll just kind of continue with the story. So, my view would be, no, be kind to the boy, give to him, don't alienate him. But my grandpa would be like, no, the boy should just go all out and not make excuses, and just, and everything will be good if he just goes all out and, works hard. And so, but like I said, in 2020, I became a leftist communist again. And I'll kind of give an example of some of the anti-white views that I had was, for instance, like my grandpa would talk about transcend dualistic software, and he would say that, white supremacy is a form of dualistic software. So I was like, okay, well, then I'll be for race mixing. And so I wrote in my Based on True Story book that I wrote at the time, like, yeah, I was a white supremacist. I did become a white supremacist, but now I've transcended consciousness. And again, I wanted to get basketball videos of when I was younger, and a lot of my friends were black, and I wanted to be like, yeah, my grandpa, he confused me, and I became a right winger, but now I understand, and now I'm a left winger again, and I have transcendental consciousness. But like, one of the anti-white viewpoints I had that I expressed was, that the Pharaoh was white. And I had, studied that the Pharaoh was actually European, and I wanted to see Europeans as bad guys. And this was kind of like, this is essentially my anti-white view that I had. In the quadrant model, the second quadrant is belief, faith, behavior, belonging. The fourth quadrant is contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing. And I wanted to be like, yeah, out of the four races, the white race is the second quadrant race, and the brown race is the fourth quadrant race. And I wanted to be like, yeah, so white people, they essentially are for belief, faith, behavior, and belonging. And that's because, that maintains a system, that maintains homeostasis, and white people have power, and that maintains white supremacy, to believe, to have faith, and stuff like that. And my grandpa was into faith, but my grandpa would be like, well, yeah, faith is when you have faith to let go and be in the flow. But I was like, so, okay, white people, they have faith, and they, faith, the way that I saw it was, it's like just believing despite evidence, and it just maintains order, and faith maintains society. And I thought that's why white people wanted to be faithful and believe and be religious, because it maintains society. So out of the four fields of inquiry, there's science, first quadrant, religion, second quadrant, third quadrant, art, and fourth quadrant, philosophy. And I thought that white people tend to be religious, like they want to have faith and they believe, and it maintains society. They want to work hard, behave. That's the second quadrant. But, and I thought brown people were more of contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing, because they want to break down the system, because to break down white supremacy and not believe. But I wanted to make the second quadrant bad and the fourth quadrant good. So I was like, yeah, not believing is actually closer to the flow, because the flow is not conformity, And I was like, if you look at the Bible, the Pharaoh, it says that he believed in God. But look, what happened to the Pharaoh? He ended up being killed, and the Israelites end up being saved. And he was a right winger, white supremacist. He wanted to destroy the Israelites and make them work, and all into like work hard and behave and believe. And, he believed in the God of Israel, but then he's destroyed. And I was like, because what the Bible is trying to say is that actually the people who are oppressed, like the black people and the Israelite, the Jews, because I was anti-white, they're the good guys. And they're the ones who aren't all into like believing and working hard, but they're not in conformity, but they're actually closer to the flow, because the flow is closer to non-conformity. Because like my grandpa taught me, if you're in conformity, you're not in the flow. Like if a coach says just shoot like this and you're shooting like that, you're not in the flow. But also non-conformity is not the flow, because then you're just shooting like this, but you're still not in the flow. But at least non-conformity is closer to the flow, but the flow is transcendence of the self, right? And transcendence. So regardless, like I wanted to make everything the opposite. So I was like, yeah, so it's actually good. The Bible's saying that the Israelites do not believe, but that's actually good, because belief is closer to the flow. And the Israelites are actually the ones who are saved. And the Bible says that they will be saved in the end. And even though they don't believe and don't have faith, but I'm like, but that's the point. Adam and Eve, they didn't believe. Well, why did God choose them if he knew that they wouldn't believe? And I was like, well, because that's actually the flow, to not believe, to think, and to not believe is actually closer to the flow. Because, the first quadrant, sensation, perception, response, awareness, and belief, faith, behavior, belonging is second quadrant. Then thinking, emotion, doing, dreaming is a third quadrant. So that's closer to the fourth quadrant, flow. And then contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing is a fourth quadrant. So I'm like, first you have to break out of belief, and then into thinking, and then into the flow. And I was like, so I wanted to be like, white people are associated with believing in religion and maintaining white supremacy and the status quo and everything, and working hard and behaving. But the fourth quadrant, contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing, that's the death of the self. And that's what the Israelites who are more brown. And they're actually, that's actually closer to the flow, to not believe. And that's why they end up being saved in the end. Whereas the people who believe, like the Pharaoh who was white, he ends up being destroyed. And I studied that, like the Sumerian nobility were actually white people, and, the Philistines were actually Indo-European, and, they believe in God, but then they end up being destroyed. Like they take the idol of God and they put it in their temple, but then the idol kills their God, and then it kills all of them, and then it goes back to Israelites. And I was like, see, the Israelites didn't believe, and then they got the idol stolen, but then the Gentiles who are white people, they end up getting killed. But then and that saves the Israelites, because they get converted. The Gentile white people, they believe and they get converted, but then they end up being destroyed. And I was like, and I wanted to be like, and that's what happened with Christianity. The white Romans believed, but then they ended up being destroyed, and the Jews who didn't believe, by converting their enemy, it destroyed their enemy. And that's what Gibbon said. Christianity destroyed the Roman Empire, and it saved the Jews. So I wanted to invert everything and be like, see, it's all a trick to destroy the white people and save the brown people, to save the Jews. And so I had like a race way of looking at it. And I wanted to be like, yeah, so the Bible's communist, it's leftist, and it's for the people of color. It's for the oppressed, and it's against the white people. That's the way I wanted to see it, because I wanted to beat the white people, and I wanted race mixing. So that's a lot to go over. But so let's go back to the story. So that's kind of the way that I looked at things when I was anti-white communist. And again, in 2020, I became anti-white communist leftist again. And I was for race mixing, but I was like, yeah, I'm in the flow. I'm transcending the self. I'm not trying to protect and preserve the self. The Fox News people, those people are the white supremacists, and they're actually the Baal worshipers, because they want to protect and promote and preserve the self. They just want white supremacy. They want to make women into baby makers. And they're just white supremacist Nazis, and they're the Baal worshipers, because worshiping Baal is actually worshiping a fertility god, which is worship of the self. So I tried to like invert everything to make the white people bad again, right? And another thing that I did that I wanted to believe with that was like, I wanted to be like, Jesus said, that only he who hates his family can follow him. And I hated the Fox News people, because they're all into like the family, like, oh yeah, the family's good. And I was like, no, but and I was a communist, so I was like, yeah, they're so into the family because they want to protect and preserve their race and stuff. But I wanted to destroy the family. But my grandpa would later tell me like, no, actually, having harmony in your family can be an aspect of the flow, And I wish that was in my family, but my family became so screwed up because of the shoot away machine and all that crazy stuff. But regardless, I became a leftist communist again in 2020. And that's the way I was looking at things. So I'll continue with the story again in the next lecture.